Welcome back, guys. Week 4 of the season is in the books, and we have dominated the Vikings to move our record to 4-0. Before we get started, remember to like, comment, subscribe, turn those notifications down below, and let's get straight into talking about what happened in that last game. We defended our home turf once more as we easily took down the Vikings by a score of 40-18. We dominated on defense, and we ran a very efficient offense. So now, let's take you through the story of this game to see how we got to the final score. This game started off very hot as our defense took over from the jump, starting with Zaven Collins. He would fly in off the blitz up the middle, and on the very first play of the game, he would get home to drop Cousins for the sack, and that would be the statement piece of his productive day, as he would finish this game with double-digit tackles. Then, on the very next play, it would be Khalil Mack, who would end up giving us our second straight sack, as he would win off the left side and bringing down Cousins, backing them up even further now with the ball placed very close to their own end zone. And we would make our opening statement on the following play as Cousins would be chased into his own end zone, where it would be B.J. Ojulari, the reigning Defensive Rookie of the Year, who would get home for a third straight time for the sack, but this time he would force a fumble, which Minnesota would recover, but it would result in a safety. So they would be forced to punt the ball, and that would mean our own Kyler Murray would take the field, and he had an incredible day tossing the rock, as he would end up throwing for a little under 300 yards and 4 scores through the air. But his one glaring mistake would come on this drive, as they would drive all the way down the field, and he would be picked off by Jordan Lewis, as he would throw a ball trying to do too much, and it would lead to Lewis to return it 24 yards to get his team the ball back unscathed. But our defense was not ready to slow down at all, as a few plays later it would be Clelin Ferrell who would get in on the fun, as he would win off the left side to add a 4th sack to our team total in just the first quarter. And then, 2 plays later, Bryce Huff would create one of the biggest moments of the game, as he would power through the guard and bowl over Cousins to cause another fumble, which he would scoop up himself, and he would return it 28 yards for the scoop and score touchdown to allow the defense to score another 6 points. And he would continue to dominate throughout the entire game, as he would pick up 2 additional sacks and a TFL as well. We would end up forcing a 3-and-out, and then when we got the ball back, we would start getting the ground game going with James Conner. He would do a phenomenal job getting the starting role back for the first time in a while, as he would total over a $110 on the ground and average just under 6 yards a carry. And it would be KJ Hamler who would deliver the first offensive score of the afternoon, as he would end this drive bringing in the reception off the end zone slant to put them up by 15. Then the game would settle down a bit, and the Viking offense started to get a little bit going with Kirk Cousins, but this was far from his best performance of his career, as he picked up a lot of yards late to get him just over the 200-yard mark and 2 passing touchdowns, but for the majority of the day, he was simply ineffective. The true driving force of this offense ended up being Devin Singletary. Their first sign of life would come on this play, where he would break off this 33-yard run, and he would get involved through the run and the pass, as he would end up totaling over 100 yards all-purpose. And they would put a stamp on this drive, as they would get all the way down to the 5, and it would be TJ Hawkinson who would bring in an extremely tough grab, as he ate a rough shot, and it would end up resulting in their first points of the game. Things would settle down a bit more, as we would see a few 3-and-outs, and we would add a field goal, but we would put together another massive play, as we would toss up the long ball, and it would be KJ Hamler again who would come down with it, and he would bring in his second touchdown grab of the game. We then moved into the second half, and after an impressive drive, it would be Alex Arma Jr. who would find the end zone, as he would bring in the play-action ball and race to the pylon to make this a 4-score game. Minnesota would put together a solid drive of their own, as they began to involve Jordan Addison into the receiving game, as he would finish with just over 50 yards receiving, but the drive would stall, and they would be forced to settle for the field goal. The momentum would then start to turn, as it would be Jordan Lewis who would make another play, as he would fly into sack Murray and force a 3-and-out on us. But we would match that on the next drive, as it would be our own Foloronso Fatukasi who would drop Cousins yet again, as he got a free rush and made them pay for it. Now, Before we get into the final quarter of play, we have to discuss our second leading contributor in the receiving game, as it was Michael Wilson, the second-year receiver who made multiple big grabs when we needed it, and he would end up finishing the day with over 60 yards receiving on just 3 catches. But the Vikings would enter the fourth quarter attempting to create the late comeback, and that meant targeting their number one receiver, Justin Jefferson. He was very limited as they were unable to get him the ball much at all, but he would end up bringing in this easy catch near the pylon to get them 6 points closer. They would end up going for 2, which they would successfully pick up after a tough grab from Jordan Addison, and they would keep the pressure on as on the following kickoff, our own Andre Bocelli would get laid out by a massive hit by the rookie Sean Payne, which would force a fumble, but they would hop right back on it to retain possession, and had we lost it, this one would have got a lot more interesting for the Vikings. But we then marched our way down the field with a dominant running and passing attack, and we would go to our own superstar receiver in Hollywood Brown, and he would have a similar touchdown grab on the opposite side pylon to bring in the score to move this one right back to a 3-touchdown margin. So Minnesota would get the ball back with their hopes beginning to end, and they would eat this big sack from Huff, which would end up causing them to lose 14 yards on the play. And then, on the very next play, would get even worse, as this time he would avoid Huff, but he would be caught by Ojulari, who would dislodge the football from Cousins once again, and he would get on the ball, and this would essentially secure the game for us. Or so we thought, as on our opening play of the possession, our workhorse rusher in James Conner would fumble, as it would be Brian Asamoah who would fly in and make the big time play for Davenport to dive on it to give them one last chance, but after making a vital 4th down stop, this one was over for good. So after the game, we went into the locker room and we spoke with none other than Kyler Murray. And he said he didn't have the game he set out to have, but personal achievements are secondary to getting the win. And we accomplished that this week. And we responded saying that's a good attitude to have, especially as one of the leaders of this team. Keep preaching that to the team and we're going to go far. And with that, Murray would get +5 to his medium and deep throw accuracy for next week's game. And we would get some more good news as we received word that Bryce Huff was named the NFC Defensive Player of the Week for Week 4 with his stellar stat line, which ended with 8 tackles, 3 sacks, 1 fumble forced and recovered, with the scoop and score touchdown to go with it. But we could then look back at the matchups that went down across the entire league, and we would start with the Thursday Night Football matchup in which the Seahawks traveled into Lambeau, where they would embarrass the Packers on their home turf. Green Bay would start with an impressive opening drive, which they would take all the way down the field for their fullback, John Lovett, to punch into the end zone for the opening score. But from then on, it would be all Seahawks as they would dominate through both the air and the ground, starting with quarterback Geno Smith, who would throw for just over 200 yards, and he would toss 2 scores in back-to-back quarters, with his first going to Jackson Smith-Njigba, and then his second would go to Kenneth Walker, their lead back, who dominated on the ground as he would total over 100 yards rushing on the night, and he would end up doubling his touchdown total as he ran one in as well. And their final statement on the game would come near the end of the third quarter when their second-year back, Zach Charbonnet, would find a touchdown of his own to put them up by 3 scores. But the reason the Packers couldn't get anything going was because the Seahawks defense was in the head of Jordan Love, and they forced him to throw 4 interceptions on the day, which went to Jordan Brooks, Darius Williams, Quandre Diggs, and Kobe Bryant, respectively. We then moved over to the 1 o'clock Sunday slate where the 49ers would get upset on the road by the upstart Bears. Chicago would get the ball first, and it would be Justin Fields who would rush one in on the scramble to give them the opening score. Then San Fran would do the same with their QB and Brock Purdy to tie the game right back up. Ball would go right back to Chicago, and this time they would rush one in with Dalvin Cook to put them back on top. When the Niners got the ball back, Purdy would end up throwing his first of 2 interceptions to Tremaine Edmonds, which would be followed by a quick passing touchdown from Fields to Cole Kmet to put them up by 2 scores. San Francisco would attempt to halt the momentum as they would focus the game plan through pounding the rock with CMC, who finished just 2 yards shy of 100 on the day. And then Jake Moody would nail a field goal to shorten the margin to 11, but then in the closing moments of the first half, Fields would toss in his second score to Darnell Mooney. Entering the third quarter now, the defense would start to take over as Fields would throw a pick of his own to Jair Brown, but it would be answered by Purdy throwing a second of his own to Bobby Wagner. Then the 49ers would attempt to construct the comeback as they would focus on targeting Brandon Ayuk in the receiving game, which would lead to Moody nailing a second field goal, and then late in the game, Purdy would end up scrambling in another rushing score, but they would fail on the onside kick, and that would mean Bears win. And then our last game of focus came from the 4 o'clock slate as the Rams would continue their winless season as they would get bested by 18 by the Detroit Lions. And the Rams just could not get anything going on offense, as although Curtis Atkins had one of his better games of his young career, he could not get into the end zone, and he would end up throwing another interception to C.J. Gardner-Johnson. But Detroit was very consistent, scoring a touchdown every single quarter, starting with Jared Goff tossing in the opening drive score to Jameson Williams. And then they would win the ground game effectively, as Jahmyr Gibbs would give them their second score, and Ezekiel Elliott as the backup would punch in a pair in the final 2 quarters. In this second half, the Rams offense would start to put something together as they would make Cooper Kupp the focal point, and he would bring in over 100 yards through the air, and then Cam Akers would punch in their only touchdown of the game. But their momentum would be stalled as the Lion pass rush would begin to take over late, as Chris Wormley would get home twice, Aiden Hutchinson would get home once, and the only points they could muster from that point was a Brandon McManus field goal. Now that we are a full month into the season, we can take a look at some of the standings for the entire league, starting with team records. We are in a 3-way tie for the top spot in the NFC as the Giants, Bengals, and us all hold a 4-0 record up to this point. And that puts us atop the NFC West as well, which we can now take a moment to analyze. Trailing right behind us in second place is the Seahawks at 3-1. And they've been pretty impressive thus far, as after losing their opening games to the Raiders by a single score, they grinded out 2 tough victories against New England and Miami, and then we just talked about the win they put together convincingly in Lambeau. The next month of the year will be an interesting one for them, as they have some tough opponents, as they have 2 straight road games against the Vikings and the Bucks, and then they return home to take on the Rams, and they have a second divisional game as they head into Santa Clara to take on the 49ers. In the third position is those same 49ers at 2-2. And just like last year, this team seems to be a very on and off unit. They lost the first Monday Night Football game of the year by a field goal, and they would respond with a field goal margin win of their own against the Commanders, and then a dominant victory in Detroit. But then, we just spoke about the Chicago upset they most recently felt. The next month of the season for them should help out their record if they show up, as they have 3 games they're expected to win against the Rams, Broncos, and Saints, but then they have a massive test in Week 8, as we already mentioned, they will be meeting Seattle. And lastly, we have the pitiful Rams who sit at 0-4, and they continue to look worse and worse as the season continues. Their best showing came in Week 1 as they lost by 1 score to the Bears at home, and they would get embarrassed for the following 3 weeks, losing to Atlanta, Buffalo, and of course, the previously mentioned Detroit Lions. And things don't look to get much better in the upcoming month as they go on the road to take on the Niners, have a quick home stint to face the Dolphins, and then they go right back on the road to take on the Seahawks, and then their best chance at finding their first win comes all the way in Week 8 when they take on the Patriots. We then went through some player statistics through this point in the season. Through 4 games, Murray has thrown for an impressive 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns, but we need to limit the interceptions as he sits at 5 already. Our best rusher to this point has been James Conner, as he is averaging a shade under 5 yards a carry, and he has already punched in 5 rushing scores on the young season. Our leading receiver is, of course, Hollywood Brown, as he finds himself a bit over 300 through the air thus far. On the defensive side, our leading tackler is, of course, Zaven Collins, while our TFL leader is the reigning NFC Defensive Player of the Week in Bryce Huff with 8. And he also finds himself right behind the sack leaders, as both BJ Ojulari and Michael Allison are tied for the pole position with 4.5. Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson hold the only 2 picks of our season thus far, And Thompson also holds one of our 2 defensive touchdowns on the year, with the other of course going to Bryce Huff in our previous game. Looking across the entire league, Murray is the leader in passing yards overall, but he is bested by 1 in the touchdown totals as Joe Burrow and surprisingly Desmond Ridder are tied with 11. We also have a 3-way tie for most interceptions thus far as Curtis Atkins for LA, Will Levis for Tennessee, and Jordan Love for Green Bay have all thrown 6 in just 4 games. The league's leading rusher is Saquon Barkley as he has over 500 yards already, averaging over 6 yards a carry, and our own James Conner is tied for 2nd in touchdowns as Nick Chubb leads by 1 with 6. The receiving leader is Brandon Ayuk, who finds himself just 4 yards shy of 400 yards, and Atlanta's Richie James Jr. is the league leader in receiving scores as he already has 6. On defense, Zaven Collins does lead the entire league in tackles. Bryce Huff tops the TFL chart, although it does not show it here, but the sack leader thus far is amazingly Carolina's Derek Brown with 6.5 sacks. And it is the future Hall of Famer Bobby Wagner who leads the league thus far in interceptions with 3. And the most field goals to this point goes to San Francisco's Jake Moody as he has gone a perfect 8 for 8. But now we can get back to focusing on us as we return to the renegotiation table, and we began with Cam Edwards. He has been a difficult situation as he wants to get paid off his potential, but he has yet to prove anything. So this week, we offered him a 4-year deal worth $10.8 million, averaging $1.8 million a year in salary, and he declined, saying he was looking for a better fit, but he'll reconsider with more offers like this. We then moved to the offensive line with Will Hernandez, and while he is nearing that 30-year-old mark, he is still a good player, and hopefully he can evolve into a mentor for our young guards looking to develop behind him. So this week, we offered him a 2-year deal worth $9.6 million, averaging $2.3 million a year in salary, and he declined, saying, "You know I love this team, but this deal is just wrong." So we moved along once more, and we found ourselves on Kaiser White. And although he is having one of the best seasons of his career, he has little interest in this team, but we continued negotiations as we offered him a 3-year deal worth $13.2 million, averaging $2.2 million a year in salary, and he also declined, saying he could find a better team in free agency that will match this current offer. And he is starting to look like a lost cause to this point. So after 3 failed opportunities, we turned to the 24-year-old outside linebacker, Victor Dimukeje. And while Cameron Thomas is primed for that starting spot, Dimukeje is a quality backup that has a ton of interest in this team. So we offered him a 2-year deal worth $5 million, averaging $1.5 million a year in salary. And he declined, saying this was unacceptable, even considering he wants to continue playing here, and we are not having a ton of luck right now. After that, we moved along to the man starting in that same position right now in Khalil Mack. It's extremely likely he retires after the season, especially if we end up winning the Super Bowl. But we wanted to shore up a contract in case he chooses to continue playing, as he has been incredible so far. So we offered him a 1-year deal worth $12.8 million with $6.7 million in salary. And he accepted, saying he is excited to sign such a great offer and to stay with the team. And now we have the possibility of extending his dominance with us. After that veteran acceptance, we move to another former star nearing retirement in Zach Ertz. We understand not only his playing value, but also his mentorship abilities. So this week, we offered him a 2-year deal worth $14 million, averaging $2.6 million a year in salary. And he declined, saying although this team aligns with his interests, this offer certainly doesn't, and it sounds like he understands his worth too. And then, we decided to try a different approach. We have talked about it previously, but we have too much talent at the receiver position, and we need to get some value for it. So we checked out the trade value around the league for Zach Pascal and Rondale Moore. And the only teams seeming to show any real interest were the Green Bay Packers and the New England Patriots. And it was only for Rondale Moore. And he is honestly the guy we were more looking to ship out, as he has too much potential to be stuck on the bench. So, starting with New England, They have over $70 million in cap space, which is more than enough to get a long-term extension done and make the trade effective to pulling them out of the poor position they're with this current roster, and potentially capitalizing on the surprising hot start they've had to this year. Wide receiver is their fourth highest team need, and looking at their current receiver depth chart, it looks like he could slide right into that number 2 receiver role and grow into the lead receiver for them as the rest continue to age out of their prime. Then over to Green Bay. They are in a similar roster position, same record position, but they have much less cap room to work with. Wide receiver isn't even listed in their top 5, and looking at their current receiver depth chart, he would come in as the best receiver, but it wouldn't be by a ton, and it would be a struggle to get him the extension he wants. So, we focused on New England and scanned their roster hoping to find the trade piece that would make this worthwhile, and that is when we stumbled upon middle linebacker Marte Mapu, and he may have been the perfect find. A 24-year-old star that is only going to get better, has 3 cheap years on his contract including this season, and he would solve the Kyzir White re-signing issue while also saving some cap space. So after some negotiating, we officially got the trade finalized as we would send Rondale Moore over to the New England Patriots in exchange for Marte Mapu and a 6th round pick this year. And with that, he is our newest Arizona Cardinal. He will currently slide in as a backup, but you can expect to see him involved here and there this season, and he will be projected to step into that starting role next season alongside Collins with the departure of Kyzir White. So with that, we decided we could then look to re-sign Zach Pascal as the 29-year-old is a solid piece off the bench, so we offered him a 1-year deal worth $4.3 million with $2.6 million in salary, and he declined, saying we know he loves this team, but this deal is just wrong, and maybe we do need to entice the offer just a bit. And then we made the decision to withdraw from negotiations on Alex Arma Jr., Jonathan Harrison, and Josh Wells. With Jason Verrett still being a valuable special teams asset, we offered him a 1-year deal worth $2.6 million with $1.7 million in salary, and he declined, saying if we raise that salary, we have a deal, so very close to securing that one. We then withdrew from negotiations on Cordarrelle Patterson, and we decided to sit down with James Conner. He has proved a ton to us to start the year, so we undercut him a bit from last time, hoping his passion for what we have could make the difference as we offered a 1-year deal worth $3.2 million with $2.3 million in salary, and he declined and called us out for exploiting that passion. We would then withdraw from negotiations with Joshua Dobbs and then entered into negotiations with Theo Jackson. While he isn't the greatest player, he is a solid backup with room to grow, and he has interest in staying. So we offered him a 1-year deal worth $2.8 million with $1.9 million in salary, and he declined, saying while this team aligns with his interests, this offer certainly does not. So after we completed all of these negotiations, we had some staff points to spend. So we went into the power running tree of our offensive coordinator, and we purchased the final 2 tiers of the outpost, which will boost the run block for tight ends by 3. We then looked over the news headlines from around the league for this week, and there is a ton of buzz flying around about the trade that we made to send Rondale Moore to New England for a new beginning. Even more conversations are going on surrounding our team based on our last performance, not just on offense with Murray's dominant showing, but also our incredibly dominant defense that sacked Kirk Cousins for a total of 9 times. There is also a ton of news coming out of New York, as after the Giants edged out their division rival Eagles in an upset win by a score of 29-28, they officially moved to 4-0 on the season, but it looks like their star left tackle in Andrew Thomas doesn't believe in the long term of this team, as he has shut down extension talks and he will be heading to free agency. We also have a draft prospect story, as it is LaJarvis Wilburn, who has been biding his time waiting for his shot at the starting QB job at the University of Houston, and that opportunity has finally come. And while we don't know a ton about him just yet, he could be a promising steal for a team with that 2nd to 3rd round draft projection. And after the record-breaking season Von Miller put together just last season, he has officially been put on record watch, as he found his 151st sack of his career this past week, which moved him into the 5th all-time position in sacks. He is almost certainly out of career longevity to top the mark of 200 from Bruce Smith, but it will be very interesting to see how high he can get on this list. The Philadelphia Eagles will look to bounce back from that tough loss to the Giants as they head into a high-profile matchup as they take on their greatest rival of all in the Dallas Cowboys. And another high-profile matchup coming this week involves us as we will be welcoming the Buffalo Bills into our building. One of the toughest teams the AFC has, and they will give us one of our greatest battles of the entire season. So let's start with looking at who will not be involved this week. We still have the prior injuries to deal with, as Tyson Williams still has 1 week to recover from his torn labrum, Michael Allison has 1 more week to recover from that upper arm fracture, and our rookie running back Sean Jones will take another 2 weeks recovering from his broken ribs. And for the Bills, they will be completely healthy heading into this matchup. And to take this team down, you have to figure out a way to stop Josh Allen. He is the leader of this team, being able to deliver perfect balls through the air and having the super strength and toughness to run people over as a ball carrier. And his number one weapon to attack opposing defenses is, of course, Stephon Diggs. Entering his 10th season in the league, he is able to get himself open and come away with incredible grabs week in and week out, and that has led him to 6 straight 1,000-yard receiving seasons, and he'll look to continue that trend with a great performance today. But their defense is just as dangerous as their offense, starting with their captain of the secondary in Tre'Davious White. He will be the man matched up with Hollywood Brown for the majority of the game, and he tends to lock down the other team's star receiver as he is like glue, staying with his assignment. And on the defensive line, it's the future Hall of Famer, Von Miller. At this point in his career, he has absolutely nothing to lose, and he is putting together some of the best performances of his career as he continues to add to the legacy and climb that all-time sack leaderboard we previously discussed. And it will be very tough to stop him from that this week. And that will be even more difficult because on the opposite side, it's the 24-year-old Greg Rousseau, and he is almost as dominant as Miller. And after 12.5 sacks a season ago, he would love to get back to that mark yet again this year. And right behind them in the linebacker role is, of course, Matt Milano. He has such an interesting skill set as an outside linebacker as he is able to both play the run and drop back into coverage, and he is such a stifling defender to get past as an offense. And their biggest difference maker may very well be Gabe Davis. With his contract expiring this past offseason, he has enough talent to be a top receiver on a ton of other teams in the league, but he decided he wanted to stay, and he wanted to continue Buffalo's push to the playoffs. And our corners are going to have a very tough test with this duo this week. Overall as a team, their quarterback does a ton for this offense, and pairing him with all of his incredible receiving needs is dangerous. Their running attack is solid with the inclusion of an average offensive line and the possibility of both Allen and Harris running the ball. On the defensive side, their pass rush is absolutely menacing, and they have some top tier corners covering our receivers. But if we can avoid Milano in the middle of the field and attack their safeties, we can have a very good chance in this one. Knowing who we were going up against, we could now set our game plan for this upcoming matchup. Starting on defense, we want to defend the deep pass. Allen has too strong of an arm, and we can't let him get those big shots downfield to tear down our defense. And then on offense, we want to focus on throwing it short. We want to force the safeties to drop down into the box and then allow us to load up the big shots without the safeties being involved. It was then time for us to set our game day goals for this upcoming matchup. First, we want to win the turnover battle. We've discussed this before, but anytime you have a tough battle with little separating the teams, winning the turnover battle usually decides the game. Next, we want to get 300 plus offensive yards. Buffalo does possess a tough defense, but we have been on fire as an offense, and we need to continue that trend to find the win. After that, we want to allow 20 points or less. This will most likely be a tight battle, so if we can keep them under 3 scores, I like our chances at taking the W. And lastly, we want to get 2+ passing touchdowns. We said it before, we need to attack these safeties and take advantage of this weakness this defense possesses. We then advanced through practice for the week, and we did not escape unscathed, as our new addition Mapu would suffer a high ankle sprain and Khalil Mack would end up getting turf toe. But we did get some great growth this week on the other hand, starting with the reigning Defensive Rookie of the Year, B.J. Ojulari. He has continued to be a dominant threat rushing off the edge, and today he had a ton of improvement in his acceleration, finesse moves, man coverage, play rec, power moves, pursuit, and zone coverage. After that, we move over to the offense with our star tight end, Trey McBride. He continues to be our go-to guy when we need a clutch reception, and today he further developed his catch in traffic, deep and short route running, pass blocking, release, run blocking against both finesse and power moves, and his stiff arm. We then moved along to our most recent trade acquisition, Marte Mapu. He did get injured in training, but we have such high hopes for him, and he ended up improving in his tackling today. It was then time for some rookie development as we had our center, Chris Sara. He has done great holding on the center of the O-line, and today he improved his awareness and his run blocking against power moves. And last but not least, we move to our veteran running back, James Conner. He has redefined his role as a starting rusher in this league and continued to keep himself game day ready as he improved in his break tackle and stiff arm. And with that, we have discussed everything we have needed to for this week. If you guys enjoyed, remember to like, comment, subscribe, turn those notifications down below, and I will see you all next time as we stay right here at home to take on the Bills.